Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for U Sports and apparently all things Canadian football. Me and Tom are back on the mics with an emergency podcast because of the news that has come down from the evil overlords above controlling the CFL at this point to make this unilateral, outrageous decision that after I asked Tom how he's doing, which he's going to be kind about it, he's not doing well about this, folks. We're going to get into, and we might even cuss a little bit. I don't know. Tom, how the heck are you?
Not fucking great, Zach.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I mean, watching that report, watching that and the way that was I watched the TSN cast live and the way that this was kind of brought about, there's a lot of rationale that's been put into this. There's a lot of, okay, well, uh, this is more exciting, therefore we will make this kind of change. But I don't know how much of like the idea that this is a Canadian game came into those calculations when making these changes. And that's what really pisses me off.
For those who don't know, to take them through the press release, the statement. I mean, let's just go word for word. It's a bit of a long one, but like just so everyone's on the
Yeah.
same page of what the hell is going on here.
So the official title of this release is Tradition Meets Innovation, Making a Great Game Even Greater.
Mhm.
There are modified changes that are happening in the 2026 season with the big changes coming in 2027. So in 2026, um, they are modifying the Rouge. The Rouge will no longer include a single point for a missed field goal attempt that goes wide of the goalposts. A point will also not be awarded when a punt or kickoff sails through or rolls out the back or sides of an end zone without being touched by a returner. If a punt, field goal, or kickoff settles in the end zone and the returner fails to take it out or takes a knee, a single point will be awarded. The change eliminates games being decided by a missed field goal, punt, or kickoff through the end zone.
Okay, so I'm glad we're talking about that to begin with. Let's break it up because on the one hand, I'm like, I could be open to this conversation of altering when the Rouge is handed out. But the thing I can't stand is that to me, this is purely kowtowing to people who don't watch Canadian football when a highlight of a game ending on a missed field goal out the back of the end zone or a punt through the back then makes its rounds on social media. And people who don't watch a single down, snap, or second of Canadian football mock it entirely. And whether you think it's always effective, because again, I'm not necessarily opposed to a conversation about it. But a conversation, it's one of Canada's great quirks of how we play football that we have that rule in place. And obviously, it's not a complete dismantling of it, but still, the only conversation, and obviously, I'm the least online person out there. But by all accounts, it seems like the only people that seem to go at that are non CFL fans to begin with. CFL fans across the board, Canadian football fans across the board recognize that you may have been in a situation where you lost one on one of those and it bloody stinks. You may have won one and it feels a little cheeky, but you pulled it away. But that's our game. That's our game.
So I'm a little bit easier on this one. I have said a few times over the years that I love the Rouge, but I don't want to have an award for a missed attempt. So especially on a field goal, a missed field goal, I don't think should be awarded a Rouge. The punt, I guess, is one thing because teams can easily say, okay, if you're not going to award us for a Rouge on a missed field goal, then we'll just go into a punt formation on the 30-yard line if we need a single point and just boot that thing through the end zone. A kickoff to me, regardless of whether or not somebody touches it, if you can boot a football from the opposite 45-yard line through the end zone of a CFL field, you should be awarded a point for that just for having a cannon for a leg. But that's getting into semantics a little bit. And so for the most part, I'm okay with this one.
Again, open to the discussion on it. Doesn't seem like that was part of the decision, but you know what? Point granted. Actually, sorry, I should watch my mouth. Point granted is, I guess we can't say points granted anymore. Proceed.
The second and final one that's going to be happening in 2026, and opposite field team benches and a 35-second play clock. All teams will be required to have their bench areas on opposite sides of the field, eliminating cases where some players are required to run 50 or 60 yards for substitutions. Some stadiums currently feature benches on opposite sides, while others are side by side. To improve game flow and consistency, a new 35-second play clock will automatically begin as soon as the previous play is whistled dead. Currently, the 20-second play clock does not start until manually initiated by an official. The change eliminates inconsistencies in timing caused by teams getting set at their own pace, varying times taken to set yardage markers, and more.
I mean, when we talk about game flow, to me, one of the biggest upsides of Canadian football over American is how the game is always seemingly alive towards the end of it. And the game clock starting at 20, sure, I'll take into consideration those points of that there's maybe some human error in it. It's still sports after all. Human error is somewhat essential to it to begin with. But to me, the more you extend that play clock, the more you make ends of games fait accompli when there's a lot of time, but teams can just run it down. That to me is that feels contradictory. That feels just a proof of concept of a league with a 40-second runoff that starts right away versus ours with the blown in one at 20. And I think we clearly have the more exciting game in the ends of the game.
Yeah, this to me is the one that most blaringly sticks out as like, well, we want to make a change here, but like we don't want to do anything like the NFL, so we'll make ours 35 seconds instead of 40 seconds. And you're like, when asked about this, and I don't have the direct quote, so if I'm wrong here, apologies, but the essentially after Stuart Johnson gave this announcement, he was asked how much of the American rules came into effect when you guys were making this. And he claims we looked at our game as if it was a blank canvas and that we looked at our game and our sets of rules and what makes sense for us. You can't really do that when you both play football, albeit, yes, it's two completely different leagues and different sets and different everything. But as you continue to make changes in the direction you're making changes, you it would be impossible not to draw comparisons to what the NFL is actively doing. And this is exactly one of those.
And to jump ahead to what I think is in the last part of the statement, that a big emphasis on them is to improve scoring. That's one of the biggest reasons that scoring gets limited, that teams can just wind down the clock. I I don't know. Continue, Tom.
So what I will say on the field team benches side of things, I am actually a big fan of this. If for no other reason, just to standardize how every team is going about certain things. You know what? Let's have this as a standard practice across. Let's look a little cleaner. Let's seem a little bit more professional. I'm I'm okay with that, albeit a tiny minuscule fucking change, but I'm okay with that one.
To be honest, as someone who only ever goes to games at BMO Field, that's just what I experience. I frankly never really took in that at other games when I'm watching on TV that they share the sideline. That actually, like that to me, I'm surprised that that wasn't already the case because again, it's what I experienced just being down at BMO, and it just does make sense. So hey, again, fair enough.
So that concludes 2026. The 2027 game plans are where you and I have the majority of our issues. And let me get through the entirety of this because both kind of lens off of itself. So first and foremost, goalposts are being put at the back of end zones to allow passing offenses to target the middle of the end zone and to make settling for field goals less attractive. Goalposts will be moved to the back of end zones. The shift removes an obstruction that impacts the middle third of the end zone, helping to drive more of football's most exciting play, touchdowns. The change also benefits teams pinned deep in their own territory, allowing offenses previously limited by the goalpost to expand their playbooks, as well as enabling punters to kick more freely from their own end zone without interference. Now they go on to say projected gains of reposition field goal posts. There should be 10% more end zone completions because of this, and 60 more touchdowns per season by this. Coupled with that is 15-yard end zones and 100-yard fields. To ensure scoring remains high and that the kicking game remains relevant, end zones will be shortened from 20 to 15 yards. The CFL will still have the largest end zone of any form of professional gridiron football. The field will also be shortened from 110 to 100 yards while retaining its distinctive 65-yard width, allowing offenses to start closer to the opposition's end zone.
Tom, correct me if I'm wrong. Does do larger end zones or smaller end zones promote greater scoring?
That would be larger.
Be larger. Gotcha. Gotcha. And theoretically, since we're on the topic of more opportunities for offenses and trying to limit special teams in certain ways, hey, why not an extra down? I mean, wouldn't that help out offenses as well? Why don't we just give them more opportunities? Because that would give you more time to be able to march the ball down. Like it's to me, it's like such a weird contradiction in terms where in certain areas, again, the fact that they're shortening the field, you can understand in connection with the point they're ultimately making of like, okay, it's less room. But then why are we stopping at 100? Why aren't we just doing the whole game as overtime rules? Why aren't we just doing it straight shootout style? Again, it's the Canadian game, the way it's been structured, the way that we have it that is so unique, that is the essentially Canadian game, the essential Canadian game. And then for them to make that argument, and on the other hand, say you're going to shorten the end zones, I don't see how those that like square that circle or make that math. Because on the one hand, I can understand, though I'd still object to the shortening of the field. If that's their rationale, you're you're going right back on that by saying you're shortening the end zones. I don't get that at all.
Yeah, to me, the idea of putting the goalpost in the back of the end zone for the longest time, so many people had mentioned this, and I have been a victim of the goalpost in the front of the end zone. Specifically, the one that comes to mind is the 2014 Vanier Cup, where Marshall Ferguson throws one of the most beautiful passes I've ever seen that hits off one of the uprights to that instead would have gone to a wide open receiver. And for those who remember, we lost that game by a single point. So yes, that could have benefited whatever, but to put the goalpost in the back of the end zone just right away would have added 27 yards of difference to kick a field goal, which is a fair distance. Now you're only getting a field goal try if you're kicking from like the 20 or the 30 rather than that. So if you want to move that back, shortening the end zone to me, okay, fine. Makes sense from that regard if you really wanted to go about that way. The shortening of the field makes no sense to me. I don't understand why the process, why would you shorten this from 110 down to 100 when you think of, and maybe it's just the branding and maybe it's bias because we're at the 55, but that to me, the length of our fields, the distance in our end zones, that is what makes us this game one of the most unique facets of being Canadian. They play football all across the world. Japan plays football, Italy, like you see in the IFAF championship games that going on there. And while when we play there, it's American rules. Canada is the only one that has these large end zones and has an at the 55. It's why I love this branding so much because it's uniquely Canadian. To take that away with no clear reason why, to me, just makes me nervous. And I think a lot of these conversations, to be fair, and a lot of the things that I've seen online, and even some of the things that we'll mention here, is nervousness because of you make these changes, what's the next change going to be? And maybe there is no next change, and maybe this just it is it. But the fact that these changes are made within 130 days of this new CFL commissioner being in here, to me, makes me very nervous that, oh, well, these changes worked out well, or these changes didn't go exactly well how we wanted to. Let's make another change. And the idea of changing a fundamental pro sports league anywhere else, the NHL making a like a rink size change, or the NFL doing something like this, to me is just so bananas. And I don't know. There's a part of me that wants to stay rational and wants to stay okay. the Rouge and the opposite field goals and the 35 seconds, not a huge fan of, and whatever else. But then there's the Canadian football fan in me. And that's where a lot of my emotion is sitting. That is just rebelling like fuck against this.
So many things I want to touch on. And like going back to what you said about, okay, if the end zone remains the same length and you push the field goal post back, which again, it's one of those things that like it doesn't make the most sense that's at the front of the end zone. But again, I never really cared because it's our game. It's what we have. You deal with it. And obviously in the situation that you were painting, that's in the highest leverage of moments in Canadian university football. Obviously, that's a tough one to swallow, but it's just part of what you have to deal with. But at the same time, though, because your point of, well, if you move it back and it's still a 20-yard end zone, that's a larger field goal. That makes it more difficult. Isn't part of the whole conversation about removing the Rouge to not have teams just sort of frivolously taking field goals, knowing that you'll still salvage a single point out of it? So at the end of the day, if part of this conversation is about trying to promote, keep your offense on the field, making field goals more difficult, frankly, would aid in that effort. To what you said there about the uniquely Canadian part of it as well. Like there's a certain reading of the room. Let's, to me, we've always, it's a relatively apolitical show, and I'm happy
Yeah.
about that. But of all times, of any time to be doing this in a time in which now our game is taking on certain more American football traits to it, is just such a slap in the face to Canadians countrywide who have reaped the who have lived under the dismay, the tyranny of all the various things going under the current U.S. administration through tariffs and everything going on there, to now all of a sudden have this happen is to me just such a insensitive time to pull this off. And the last thing I'll say on that too is just that like like for the CFL, like there's a few things I want to say about this that relate to say who's paying for all this at the CFL level, let alone at all the youth, university, and just amateur levels of football across Canada, but as well of like they're the CFL, like in terms of viewership, fandom, and all these things, is very much reliant on a strong old guard of fans who have been watching since, I think about, again, being out of Toronto, where a lot of folks where I think about my dad who's been watching the Argos since before the Blue Jays were even around, let alone the Raptors, let alone TFC. So you grow up in a city like Toronto, and it's like, well, you have the Leafs and you have the Argos, right? And that's like what you rely on. And they've struggled so mightily, except in those great football communities we have, like Saskatchewan. I'll certainly give Hamilton some credit as well. And some of those key pockets where they have been able to recruit a youthful audience. But that's certainly what a large emphasis of what the league's been doing, and maybe in their eyes this is going to help in that effort to bring in new fans, but you're doing so by, to me, ostracizing the core fans that are really the only thing you have going for you, that there are diehard fans who've been watching this game, loving this game, coaching at every level, playing all aspects of Canadian football for our whole lives. And it's just for all those reasons, it's just to me such an insensitive, um, short-sighted, lack of foresight, whatever you want to call it, decision. I don't know.
So to me, this seems like a a big push to try and market the league better to more football fans, not just uniquely Canadian ones, but more football fans and get more eyes on the CFL. And that's what they're doing. I wish that there was a way that they were trying to do that that didn't alienate a lot of the hardcore CFL fans that we have had for so many years since the inception of this. The CFL obviously being longer than what the NFL looks like currently here. So there's that aspect. There's another aspect to me, and once again, if anybody's listening to this and disagrees with what we're thinking, whether on Reddit, whether on Twitter, Instagram, wherever, let us know your thoughts and get back to us here. But to me, the CFL being the overarching Canadian football body that it is, you have a responsibility to set the standard of what Canadian football is in this country. The idea and I haven't spoken, we haven't had a time to get an official response from U Sports as of yet, but based on the official statement that they have here that I'll read out quickly, U Sports is aware of the announcement made by the CFL this afternoon regarding changes to its field dimensions and game rules. U Sports will begin engaging with our members and stakeholders over the following weeks and months to determine the ramifications for U Sports football and the best course of action for U Sports. Any proposed changes to football playing regulations will be considered by the Sport Technical Subcommittee for Football and U Sports Sports Committee in due course following the usual procedures. Essentially just saying we're looking into this. To me, what that says is they were sitting right along with all of us waiting to hear what's going to happen with the CFL. And there's a lot of people, there's some people that say, the CFL and U Sports are not really on the best of speaking terms, and maybe they're a little whatever. As the CFL, you have a duty to recognize all of these changes that you are going to make and how it's going to affect U Sports football and amateur football as a whole. I mean, for God's sakes, 3 U Sports schools play in CFL stadiums. So it's either McGill, Manitoba, and
Calgary.
Calgary. Hey, figure out if you're going to be a part of this or get your own damn stadium. And then all of the subsequent looking down on that as, hey, we didn't want to give you guys a heads up. You're going to find out with the rest of the public here what kind of money is being put into youth programs and how many schools are out there in surrounding regions, not just in Ontario, but across the country that have maybe just put in brand new turf fields and concrete stakes for where their goalposts are. And will now, if they want to follow the model of the CFL, which naturally, if you want more Canadians in the CFL, in the Canadian Football League, you'd like them to be playing the same game with the same ramifications, with the same logistics, so that they can get used to it, play it at the highest level, and then play it in the CFL. How much money and time and effort is it going to take to change all of that in order to get that in there? And I know that there's places across the country. CJEP plays 4-down football on a CFL style field, which is really strange. BC football apparently plays 4-down football, and there's different changes and things. But I think most people can agree changing the dimensions of the football field makes a very drastic difference in how you play the game, certainly how you score going into this. And so the idea that you would just make this change without, like, hey, here's a heads up or something till all of the other bodies is nuts to me.
Yeah. Like I remember when I lived in London, the junior football teams, like nines and tens, they would play with 4 downs, which I didn't mind because 3 downs is harder. And so
Hmm.
giving those kids especially when your passing game isn't as well developed, saying, okay, let's give you a few opportunities to get like 3 yards in a cloud of dust. Okay, I get it from that standpoint as well. I don't know, man. And again, not to go into any like grand details, like I feel like this caught both of us in like very uniquely like like frustrating moments in our lives for very different reasons that we won't go into. For myself, at least, with a lot of frustration with like football in a number of arenas in my life. And it's just one of these things of like, I recognize no one ever asked us to do what we do. And we don't make a damn dime off of what we do. And it's so I recognize that we could just, cut it off right now. Wouldn't matter. It'd be a fun talking point down the line when we're sitting in a bar together of like, remember what we had going. It's just so frustrating though, on top of all the other reasons that it can be tough to be part of the football community in Canada and Ontario sometimes. Coming off, as we were both saying, a weekend actually that was very exciting for us. You being part of this great Hamilton football weekend, myself being a part of this event with Football Toronto and celebrating, with the Rib Fest or whatever. Yeah, I don't know what to say, man. Again, I am caught on that space of, as you said, of trying to be rational about it and think about what the best thing is moving forward. And I'll be surprised if there's any backtrack on it. So part of it's just like, okay, I mean, this is just we're gonna have to play it out and just see what happens with it. All those things you raised about the different, the universities, McGill and Manitoba and Calgary, like it's so bananas. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's obviously won't be the last conversation. We literally we're about to record another podcast and we're like, you know what? We actually just need to come on and do this. So, typically we're a little perhaps more eloquent, certainly a little more eloquent, a little more prepped on what we're talking about. And this is obviously going to develop more and more. But, like we are at the 55 forever. And that's always going to be the same, no matter what they try to do to it. Tom, I mean, we got another podcast to record. I don't know what final thoughts we want to say on this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Listen, like you mentioned, we are at the 55 forever. I've seen a number of people reach out to us on social media being like, "Hey, like, what's going to change with the name? You're going to be at the 50?" No. We are at the 55 forever and always, and we will remain to be that. Even if U Sports does end up making the change, and I want to be clear, if U Sports does make the same change that the CFL does, I don't blame U Sports. This is trying to make sure that our athletes are playing the same type of game that the CFL is to best prepare them in order to get into that so you see more Canadians in the game. But that being aside, the 55 is always going to be uniquely Canadian. And if it has to be something viewed like the fifth quarter as the extra 5 yards because we're covering the game and we're giving you that extra five or whatever that is, fine. But we are at the 55 forever. Don't get it twisted here.
I look forward to it being a very just if you know moment for folks. Yeah, Tom, let's cut it at that. You'll hear from us tomorrow with more optimistic talk about U Sports football. So we'll talk to you then right here at the 55.